Hello, everybody. My name is Zaine Newberry. I'll be doing a GNED 101 YouTube lesson with you guys, and we're going to be following the last two SNOW protocols to anthropology, the cause of death and manner. So without further ado, let's dig in. So this is going to be the skeleton or the skull we'll be using, and these two green circled areas is going to be the areas of study that I want to be in. And so I'm going to simply ask the question of what killed Mr. Hart. Mr. Hart's going to be our skull's name for this lesson. And so the first thing you want to ask is the cause of death. What happened to that individual? Exactly what did happen? With him, was this done via a blunt force trauma, stabbing, gunshot wound? Was it unknown? And then you're going to ask the other question of the cause of manner. How did it happen? Was it done via an accident, suicide, homicide, or unknown? In general, you're going to ask these two questions to help kind of bring closure to the family if they ask the questions of what happened or, how did it happen? So with the history of Mr. Hart, we're just going to dig a little bit into it. I determined that he was a male with his brow ridge and the mastoid process being known. I said that he was white because of this nasal spine in this area, and that he was middle-aged because his sutures are not fully closed in this area, but they are starting to close in this area. So I said that he's determined that he's a middle-aged adult. So what happened to him? The first question I want to have answered is, was this a gunshot wound? Because it looks like one. And if so, how? So fragment 6 from bone clones, they had this interesting piece from their trauma set of a keyhole is indicating a gunshot wound. And it's got like this little chipped effect too, to it, indicating it going in, as it being the entrance. And then it's got these prominent little features as well. And it's also punched inwards. So I'm also going to say that this was a gunshot wound, and I'm going to confirm it as a gunshot wound. And so where did the bullet enter and how? A handgun is easy to determine this because they're more easier to hold. So I'm looking at it as it is a handgun, and we're going to say that this is where it entered. It entered the left parietal bone area on the side of the skull, and it exited the right parietal bone in this general area as well. It was punched inward, showing a keyhole effect and clean break in the skull. As you can see that it's very clean in this area, that it was cracked, as well as there's also large chipping in the exit area. And if you sit and think about a bullet traveling through a skull, it's going to barely chip the edge, as well as when the bullet is leaving the skull, it's going to cause a lot more chipping because of the force it's pushing out with that bullet. And so we're going to dig into the cause of manner of how did it happen. What happened to Mr. Hart? Was it an accident, suicide, homicide, or was it unknown? That's the other questions you'll be asking when you're trying to dig. So the two questions I want to have answered is, was this suicide, and was this a homicide or an accident? Michelle Acker made this very well easy in how she determines certain things like this. And so the one thing that I found one of the answers to is shots on the side of the head or mouth are indications of suicide, which we're looking at shots of the side of the head here, not via the mouth. But she also said that it's the same factors as suicide, but they can also still be a homicide too. So that's what we've got the other thing. But the thing that stood out the most to me was the appearance of the small little cracks that you could see kind of in this area, and I'll have them pointed out later, that it's got a star-like appearance around the wound. And she said that if that is shown, that is indications of it being a suicide. If it wasn't, it is going to be indications that this was a homicide. So I'm pretty determined that this was a suicide, just for the angle and how everything was aligned up with this. So we'll confirm that this was a suicide. And you can see that there's indications pointed to these little star-like areas of that wound itself. So we'll confirm that the cause of death was a handgun for the location of the wound and prominent markings in this area because of that angle. And the fun fact is that 64%, and I shouldn't say it's fun, it's sad, but 64% of men make a gun their choice of suicide. And the cause of matter is suicide for the starlight cracks by the wound and location and entry of the exit of this. Um, and it's more of a suggestion that it is a cause of suicide, especially where we determined that he was a man. Um, and having the data backing that 64% of men choose this option is more confirming that it was. So we're going to ask the question, how did Mr. Hart pass away? His cause of death was from a handgun, and the manner of death was suicide. So that's what leads to the cause of this. I just want to say thank you for everybody for watching this little YouTube lesson about how we can determine certain aspects of this skeleton and how we determine the skull that Mr. Hart did pass away from a suicide. So thank you everybody for watching this, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye, guys.